Hey everyone, welcome back to Just Politics. I'm Sister Eilis.
And I'm Colin. Today's episode is going to sound a little different because we're not going to be having the regular policy conversation that we normally have. Instead, we're going to be diving into some cultural issues that surround our political reality, specifically talking about gender dynamics. So for those who don't know, Network was founded by women religious over 50 years ago, and we continue to value women's leadership. And personally, as one of the few guys and fathers on staff, I've had many opportunities from being in this kind of space and learning a lot that I feel like I normally wouldn't have learned being in my regular social spaces. So today what we want to do is pass the mic to a group of young men who are part of our Carol Coston Fellows program here.
So you might be wondering, who or what exactly are the Carol Coston Fellows? The Carol Coston Fellows are part of the Young Adults Leadership Lab, and they're college students who are beneficiaries of the Sister Carol Coston Fellowship. Sister Carol is an Adrian Dominican sister, and she was one of Network's 47 foundresses, and then went on to serve as our first executive director. Now, Sister Carol's legacy looms large at Network, and this is one of the perfect ways to really honor the work that she's done her entire life. The fellowship is a paid opportunity for college students to participate in Network's advocacy at the federal level as we work to make sure that we have communities that thrive.
So today we're going to hear from the guys in that Carol Coston Fellows program, and we're going to pass the mic to them to really wrestle with some questions that we have around these cultural issues, like what does it mean to be a man today? What messages have you learned or unlearned? And what was it like going through the 2024 election? So you're going to hear their voices. You're going to hear their responses to some of these questions that we've asked them. And you're going to hear us as well, giving you some context as to who's speaking and some insights into what they say to kind of provide some context into what you're going to be hearing.
Can't wait to share the conversation with you.
So starting our conversation, we begin with the question of what it means to be a young man today in 2025 in our political and cultural reality that we're living in. And to start, we're going to hear from Stephen Perez, who is a student at Barry University in Miami. And you'll hear that South Florida context right away in everything he's sharing, from the culture he grew up with to the influence and how that all influences his faith and politics.
It's very hard out here, especially in Miami, where everybody is just acting like an influencer, acting like a social media star, and everybody is putting on this fake personality, try to act tough, try to pretend to be somebody who they're not, and then you really don't know who is who in Miami here. So it's really hard to see raw and who's really a man here. I've seen it online, especially on TikTok and YouTube. It starts off as self-improvement, but then it shifts into the toxic stuff about control, dominance, and shutting down emotions. And I've heard it in group chats too. Guys reading ideas that sound confident, but they're really rooted through insecurity. And especially in some faith spaces here at the chapel at my university, I've seen messages that lean more toward power rather than compassion.
And now we're going to hear from JC, who originally hails from Atlanta, but right now he's studying in rural Pennsylvania. That is quite the geographic and cultural difference. What you'll hear from him is how he brings a deep care for how young people, especially how young Black men, are being shaped by what they see online.
I would definitely agree with Stephen. I've seen a lot, mainly the influence I've seen is definitely on TikTok. You know, to be honest, I try to stay away from that kind of thing because that's just not my idea of how I see myself or aligns myself with the values that I would like to carry myself with as a young man. And it's just mainly the toxic, I guess, masculinity kind of thing, and like the red pill, blue pill. Like, it's just, I just don't like it at all. I try to stay away from that kind of thing. I feel like it can really mislead the younger generation, not even talking about young adults, 18, between that 18, 20, 19, 20, 21 range, but even the children in high school, middle school. A lot of our youth has access to technology and they're getting smarter by the day just by scrolling on their phones and seeing all this toxic masculinity come up on their For You page. And that's just not something that I would want the youth to see. And it can be very misleading for them as someone growing in this world.
And we also heard from Ben Dickinson. who grew up in Kentucky in a real Southern culture and is now studying at Xavier in Ohio. And you'll hear his deeply reflective take on things like, privilege, on power, and how he navigates through that.
I think to be a man in today's climate, really in Western society, for myself, my experience as a white man, it comes with a lot of privileges, a lot of unearned access to opportunity, and so privilege isn't just kind of a being able to buy woo-woo women or be able to buy an Audi or be able to buy, that's luxury. But then there's luxury at the expense of other people's freedom. When you have women are oftentimes disproportionately burdened with taking care of children when there's a home where there's a split between the parents, they're not together. You got parents working, and that's how our society expects the women to be the caretakers, regardless of their financial capability to do so. So you got women burning themselves out, and they have to choose between work, between eating and sleep, and in the law, they're free. We're not. That's not really equal, and so equality is going to come when people have equal access to freedom and have opportunity not just to survive but to thrive. And people expect me to thrive and hand me things because of things I can't control. I'm a man, and I'm tall, I'm white, I'm whatever, and come from these backgrounds. But the stereotypes that I'll hear of, we can't have a woman president. Last two times President Trump has won elections, but we need him to be able to negotiate with other world leaders because they're all men. It's not true. And the systems that are created by Congress and enforced by the courts really shapes what our country is, and that's a very female involved process, and women play a huge role in that. And people all the way to anybody, regardless of their gender identity, can play a role in civics by using their voice and organizing. And so the notion that we have to have a man as the figurehead, or else America will be perceived as weak, is a huge misconception, but it's what I hear as justification for a lot of the things that we see today.
And our next question was, what messages did you learn or have to unlearn about masculinity? And for me, this is the part of the conversation that really stuck with me. These young men were brutally honest about the baggage they've inherited and really what it's taking to unpack it and to share their learnings with the people around them, with their friends and family.
For me, I grew up in Metro Atlanta, and I would say the main things that I would say I had to unlearn was that it's okay to ask for help. I still struggle with reaching out to people, asking for help. I don't know, I'm just so kind of just independent in my own head about it, like, oh, I can do it, I got this, I don't need anyone's help. So it's definitely been a battle trying to unlearn that. And a takeaway that I have got from my childhood is that it's okay to be emotional. I feel like my mother really did a good job of providing the space for me to be okay, dealing with my emotions, whether I was sad. I would say mainly like when it comes to being sad or crying and things of that nature, like letting me know it's okay. We all have feelings, we all have emotions. This is not something you need to bottle up or put on this tough guy act or anything of that nature. As it is, she would always make me smile in our pictures because I feel like it's kind of a thing maybe among all men to kind of just straight face it, mug or something like that. But she's like, oh, you better smile in those school pictures, and so it's just, even when taking pictures, it's hard for me to even just have a straight face. Like, I have to smile. That's something that she put in me. So she just really did a good job of giving me the space to just be able to navigate my emotions.
Definitely growing up in Miami, there's a lot of Hispanics and Haitians here. So when I grew up here, it was definitely a lot of suppressing my emotions and not asking for help as a man because it seems, soft for a man to ask for help and show emotions. And I learned that throughout my childhood, and it was definitely a very strong thing that I had to let go of. It was very hard for me to do so. I'm still learning it to this day, asking for help, but it's very hard out here.
For me, I grew up very lucky with the male figures I had in my life, and now coming into social work, especially, the male figures I have there are very collectivist in their masculinity, where I grew up seeing how individual masculinity was and how that promoted a lot of toxicity because it was very self-centered. The way they displayed leadership, the way they displayed a lot of things that they thought men should be, was very toxic, and it ended up being detrimental to those around them. So coming into a collectivist view of masculinity and seeing how bringing masculine traits that aren't inherently toxic to these spaces benefited everyone, and how showing that you can be a role model not just in the house but in your community as a whole, that was very positive. And I think we need to build more of these spaces, especially online, because toxic masculinity has mastered the art of the internet, and positive forms of masculinity are very slow to catch up. I think we need to do a lot more collective action to have these forms of masculinity be what is presented to young men.
And that last speaker you heard from is Jack, who is a social work student at Elms College in Chicopee, Massachusetts, and brings a unique perspective to the conversation as a trans man. His comments about collectivist masculinity were powerful and have us still reflecting.
From there, we started talking about the experience of being a young man through the 2024 election in the context of things like toxic masculinity and the manosphere, which was a big part of the political dialogue that at least I know I personally heard a lot in my news feeds on my phone as I scrolled. So, like with many people, the 2024 election season was a deeply personal time for a lot of these guys, not just a political one. And hearing from their reflections and their insights on what kind of tensions that they felt during that time was really insightful.
During the election season at home, the atmosphere was more so, I guess, you seen Trump supporters, but Atlanta, it's a lot of black people there, and you're not really going to see a lot of Trump supporters there. So, but I will say definitely on campus, it kind of felt a sense of, I really wouldn't know how to explain it, but I want to say it kind of felt like some of the people on campus wanted me to kind of be intimidated in a sense. It was just like a lot of comments being made. I would say, if Trump wouldn't win, or not even just about Kamala win, but the fact that she was a woman running for president, the fact that she was a black woman running for president, a lot of, I'll say, insensitive comments made that kind of made me feel some kind of way. And it kind of made me feel, or made me think, what would happen if Trump wouldn't have won? What would that look like on campus? What would that atmosphere be like? Would I be threatened? Things of that nature. Because when he won, it was a huge, I guess, kind of celebration kind of thing. And it's fine, I understand, but I guess in my perspective, I kind of felt like it may have been overdone to a certain extent. When we're kind of dressing up as Trump, walking around, or maybe something as simple as a dodgeball event, and we have a team who's like dressed up as Trump, and we're going against him. It kind of feels a little awkward there. So I would say the atmosphere on campus feels a bit more awkward to me as a black man than versus at home, where I would say I feel a bit more, I guess, welcome.
There's definitely a lot of Trump supporters here. Like when I worked the UFC event at the arena, when they did the walkout for Trump, because he came to the fight, and they did the walkout for Trump. You just see all the fans chanting USA, USA, Make America Great Again, and it's just. I think my entire section was just full of MAGA hats. Crazy atmosphere. Not the good kind of atmosphere, but it was definitely crazy. And on campus, there's definitely a lot more people than you would think being involved politically. There's a lot of students here that want to be engaged more in politics. They just don't know where to start. Because if you go to TikTok, it's really 60% of it is false information. They don't know where to go for real information, the raw information, and they don't know what news sources to trust. So there's definitely a lot of student engagement here wanting to get into politics, but they just don't know how.
I think you'll hear comments where people that I know and I know would be kind to the face of somebody who is not a man. It's some things they would never tell their own daughter. But then when you get around a space where it's just men, you'll hear, we can't have a president that she'd be at the desk painting her nails. Those stereotypes. It's just, we're reducing women to a space that is archaic, a space that is proven to be unproductive for society. Like, we can acknowledge that men, women, people of non-binary gender identities, any gender identity, all have unique strengths, all have different challenges, some groups more so than others. But we can celebrate those things, and we can really just take an approach of humility to interact with each and every person and see the strengths in them, see the light in them.
I think one of the big questions that we hear a lot from ourselves at network, on staff, from the people I'm in community with, is how do we show up for others? And when we talked with the Coston Fellows, so many of them talked about stepping up, but they were clear to distinguish that it's not just for themselves, but it's how they're stepping up, how they're showing up for others.
We'll start with a new voice, Jonathan Alcantara. Jonathan is a business student at Marquette University and often finds himself as being the only person of color in his class. And it's in those spaces where we hear him wrestling and learning how to speak up.
I feel like for me, being here in the Midwest is completely different. I grew up in the South in an immigrant household, basically going to schools with only minorities and students of like families with low income. So when I came to the Midwest and like seeing all these people that I wasn't used to seeing on a daily, it changed a lot. There was times where like I was the only like person of color or the only minority in a class, especially being a business student. So like I feel like today I learned to like speak up and like I guess speak my mind on certain issues, considering a lot of the people here at school, like they have different views, they view things differently, they didn't grow up or experience the same things we as people of color did. So I guess like just being empathetic and like learning how to like understand and push your own views without trying to influence what they think, and just like trying to get them to understand as much as they could while not trying to change what they already think or how their thoughts are already formed in their head.
As we got towards the latter end of our conversation, we started talking about their connection to Network and the Coston Fellows program. And a big part is about what they were learning from being involved and collaborating with us. There was a lot of actions that they would take, from lobbying on the Hill, coming to DC, to even softer skills like learning how to listen better, which are just as important. And in here, we're going to hear from Aaron John. Aaron is a student athlete at Manhattan College playing soccer. However, he brings a very unique perspective that you'll hear in his responses, since he is an international student from Canada and also grew up in an immigrant household.
Just being a part of this fellowship, it's been spectacular. These women are absolutely spectacular. You guys both know that, and the work that they've been doing for advocacy and for the people that that can't speak for themselves. And it's honestly been an amazing experience. But one thing that I've really benefited from was the workshop that we just had in place when I was in Washington at the in March there for workshop, and we ended up doing lobbying at the House of Representatives. We really dive into how to really enact one-on-ones with people.
We also heard from Stephen, Ben, Jonathan, and Jack on their responses on what they learned working with Network.
Definitely at Network, I'm learning how to lead with compassion and courage from women who've been fighting for justice already for many, many decades. And it's shown me that faith and advocacy go hand in hand, and that real change comes from centering those most impacted and staying grounded in hope. Especially leading a lobby visit with staff members of House of Representatives on defunding deportation, the funding for Medicaid, and the funding for SNAP EBT made me realize how many people live through those problems day to day, and how many people, maybe thousands or even millions of people, I was fighting for on that day.
In working with Network, I didn't know that I was stepping into a place where in Catholic social justice, everybody kind of knows everybody. It's a little bit of a family atmosphere. And so I go to school in Cincinnati where Sister Alice Gerdeman, who's on the national board of Network, founded what was then called the Intercommunity Justice and Peace Center, now called Ignite Peace. The executive director of that used to work at Xavier. She told me about Network and the gig as part of y'all. And she had earlier in her career been at Network doing similar work to what me and Aaron are doing right now. And so they both had that background, that connection with Xavier. Our namesake for our campus ministry office, for our community outreach programs, is Dorothy Day, who founded the Catholic Worker magazine, And she's doing this all the time before women could vote. She's organizing folks to provide food to each other, things like tangible things, community gardens, daycare programs, medical clinics. And it's not just this idealistic thing. It's not an unattainable thing, which is an adjective that's thrown at people a lot. Dorothy Day and Shannon Hughes and Alice Gerdeman all are believers in the idea that if we're going to have true peace, it's going to stem from justice. And justice looks like sacrificing of one's own good, laying down your life for a friend. There's no greater love than that. There's no greater love, as the Bible says. Looks like sacrificing of yourself, sacrificing from your luxury, maybe your worldly pleasure, when it comes to overeating a meal, when it comes to laying in bed a few more minutes instead of going and composting something. It's these tangible decisions every day where we sacrifice of ourselves with our time, with our safety, sometimes to protest or unite against something, that bring us to a place where folks are aware of the systemic issues that are causing them and are also willing to sacrifice of themselves. And when we come together in that notion, that's when things start to become peaceful and we live in the harmony. That's the closest we can get to the Garden of Eden, I think.
I guess for me, I feel like I've learned so much about how this organization founded by women, and now like expanding to like a more nationally, like talking to more people, like engaging with colleges like the Y'all program does. It showed me how much of an impact a community can have when they come together and fight for something that's like right or something that they feel they should fight for. Like whether it's like I guess advocating for voting rights or pushing for better social policies like we're doing now. I guess through my work I've been able to gain a deeper understanding of some of the barriers that many of the communities face today. And I guess it's just important like speak out and like take action and like do something to improve and make the situation a lot better than it currently is. I guess it's been a powerful reminder to of the strength that comes with like working together and working with other people, and like the importance that leadership of what leadership takes to like uplift us and like make change that is impactful and helps everyone.
Coming to Network and even being at Elms College, which was founded by the Sisters of St. Joseph, really taught me a lot about intersectionality and how a female identity is kind of inseparable from their work. Because historically women aren't allowed to be politically minded, women weren't allowed to be intelligent, and how standing in their own as both women and as advocates has taught me a lot about both courageousness and being able to do this work, and also compassion, where every single step of the way the people they're serving are in mind, where a lot of the men I worked with, again, it comes back to the very individualist mindset. So it's taught me a lot about how collectivism can enter their advocacy.
And we close the conversation with something we ask people all the time. How are they finding hope? Where are they finding hope? Where are they finding examples of masculinity that inspire rather than harm?
And I think, it's low hanging fruit right now, but to talk about Pope Francis as somebody who was unique in a position of great power as a head of state in the West that stood against nationalism, that stood against xenophobia really of any kind. And, it's refreshing to hear somebody in that position of power responsible for an institution as large as the Catholic Church to seek to make faith accessible to everybody and live in a way that honors what we're called to do in the Gospels, which is not to judge, but to hope and pray, not to worry, as my confirmation Saint Padre Pio would often say, and to show grace and mercy through very tangible ways that's laid out. And the corporal works of mercy and the spiritual works of mercy, to be there for our neighbors, to lay down each other's lives, and to make our will shrink and God's will in our life increase. And so, in doing that, you'd hear the fruits of that be beautiful quotes from Pope Francis, where he'd say things like, obviously it's not dogma, but he would say, I hope that hell is empty. And I would hope that. Of course you should hope that. You should hope for the mercy, the grace of God to be felt by everybody as a Catholic. And so when people are truly in relationship with the love of Jesus, that overflows in them. And so I think that spirituality, as his example, is something that I pray as we go through this time of transition in the world, that people remember his actions and that his spirit is still alive within folks who are in positions of power similar to him.
One of my favorite world leaders of all time, Nelson Mandela, when he would make like a difficult political stance, he would take a day to think about it, and then if he generally did think he was wrong, he would come out and say, in public that he was wrong. So I think we need more of that, because as humans we have to recognize we're not perfect in any way. So that's something that I definitely think needs to be touched on more and more normalized.
One of the best alternative visions of masculinity I've seen has actually been through basketball. Being a fan of basketball, playing through basketball, and growing up playing, I learned that being a man isn't about being tough or dominant. It's about more showing up for your team, holding yourself accountable, and lifting others up during the hard times. Some of the strongest guys I played with were the ones who led with humility, encouraged others when they were down, and admitted when they messed up and when they made mistakes. That kind of leadership rooted in respect and vulnerability and what real masculinity looks like to me. It's not about control or ego or temptation or none of that. It's about character, consistency, and knowing you're a part of something bigger than just yourself. There's definitely a lot of players who have been through scandals outside of the court. So the players that I've really looked up to outside of the NBA and inside in the NBA are players like Steph Curry and CJ Stroud, who are also loud about their faith.
For me, it's definitely come from coaches, and I would say the captains of the team I have been on, and then also me being a captain of some of those teams myself. I would say the coaches, really, because when you're at least in my opinion, when you have a good coach, one of the things that they try to emphasize is how other things in life come before the sport. And I guess that the things that you can learn in the sport is bigger than the sport itself. Steven spoke on things like character. I've seen a lot of character development in a lot of the teams that I've been a part of, and it truly does help people grow. And when it comes to just being in those leadership roles and seeing others in those leadership roles, it can really tell you a lot about the team, and just someone different being in that leadership role can just change the morale in a snap of a finger, just by the way they carry themselves, by the way they hold others accountable, by the way they hold themselves accountable. So taking from the coaches that have coached me and learning from certain captains from certain teams that I've been on has helped me increase my character, how I view myself, holding myself accountable, and just my overall leadership. Because even now today, I'm a captain of the track team, and I take those same values that I've learned in the past and I make sure I carry them with me, because I also want my teammates to carry those same values for themselves. I want them to know that it's bigger than just track. It's bigger than just sprinting 100 meters, 200 meters, things of that nature.
So these conversations, I think, were very impactful for me, just because not just the reflection that we heard and the personal stories, but the learnings that we heard from each of them, not just in their own experience, but the learnings that we were able to have in having these conversations.
I totally agree. For me, as a woman religious, as someone who works at Network, I am more often than not privy to conversations like this. I don't think about this on an ongoing basis, but I see it in the news. I see it in the stories. I see it in the cultural narratives that I read about. But to really hear from the Coston fellows, to hear from them about how it really impacts them, is something that I know I can learn about and learn from in an interview and a conversation that I'm going to share with all of my friends who are teachers, who are parents, to help us get a better understanding in what we can do.
And personally, I think it's important that we do have these conversations, because they oftentimes do happen in such silos, where we're not able to hear the experiences of each other. And seeing the role that masculinity, that the manosphere, that toxic masculinity played in this last election and in our current political moment, I think is so important. So we know that this is a conversation that still is far from being resolved. It's an ongoing dialogue, right? Something that I think all of us, but especially young men, have to honestly wrestle with. And that I think we heard these young men doing very well. If we want to achieve that goal of, creating a just and inclusive society where everyone can thrive regardless of gender, I think it's important that we show up the way that these young men did. And to any guys listening, I really hope that we all can become those kind of men and people who show up with integrity and show up when it matters most. So if you were moved by this conversation, please let us know. Reach out and tell us your hopes, your dreams, how this conversation landed with you and how you can continue it. And make sure to share it with someone you love as well. And also give it a like and review. Additionally, be sure to follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, and yes, even X. And you can get updates on future episodes as well as other resources from Network to continue doing the work with us. Become a member, sign up for action alerts. Let's keep showing up for justice.
We cannot do this work without you. We need all of you in it with us. So until next episode, we're signing off, and we'll see you next week.